Hi everyone, Krzysztof the Polish Geek welcomes you to the review of the new adaptation of Wuthering with Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. And the first thing I have to say is that years ago I have actually read the book by Emily Bronte, so yeah, when it comes to book faithfulness, rest assured you're in good hands with me. I mean, it was many years ago since I've read the book, but I do remember a good amount. But then again, did it matter to me that it wasn't faithful to the book all that much? Well, admittedly, this is not something I particularly cared as I was going inside the theater, because the book was never among my favorites, really. I never considered myself a huge fan. I mean, I did like the book when I was reading it, and I remember I was very much invested reading it, and I did quite enjoy it, but at the same time, I would never call it a story I ever felt particularly passionate about. So when I heard that the director, when she said that she was gonna change things up actually and more like provide her personal interpretation of the book she read as a 14-year-old girl, when I read that, then I thought, okay, it makes sense. We all got different interpretations from the book. I didn't think it was a bad idea one bit. So yeah, the fact that it's not particularly faithful to the book is not really much of the problem for me, outside of the ending, but we'll get to that later actually. But honestly, this is probably one of the biggest mixed bags I ever watched. Like, it's been a while since I felt so conflicted about the movie, because there were some things I straight up loved and some things I straight up hated actually in this adaptation, and we'll get to, and I will talk about it right now. What did I hate and what did I love? And the first thing we gotta talk about is the production design and all that. Like, oh my gosh, this is just spectacular. The costumes are really incredible and they give such an authenticity to the time period. Not some of the casting choices, like some of them are really cringy, but again, we'll get to those later. But yes, the costumes were so incredible, as were the set pieces and the set design and the landscapes, the beautiful visuals. Again, if you've been watching my channel, you know I have a huge sensitivity to beautiful visuals, and the visuals and landscapes of the English Highlands in the area where the characters live, that was such a beauty and feast for the eyes. Like, really amazing and spectacular visuals. But as I already just said, the set pieces, the costumes, and the production design, all of that was really incredible, and it's clear how much ambitious the director was with all of that. So yes, in terms of production design and all that stuff, this is a very well crafted and beautifully directed movie. Yep, all of that is really incredible, which does also make some of the things I hated even more depressing actually. But another thing we gotta now talk about is the casting choices and the acting and the performances. Like, some of the casting choices I thought were incredible, like Margot Robbie, and I quite like Margot Robbie. I think she's a really incredible and hot actress. So Margot Robbie in the role of Kathy, I thought she was simply incredible. And yes, she's supposed to play a 16-year-old girl, but that's why she was aged up, and she's actually, and the character is like in her early to mid-20s actually in the movie. And yes, Margot Robbie is 35, but you can't really tell that. Yeah, she could totally pass as a girl in her early to mid-20s. So yeah, Margot Robbie as Kathy was simply incredible. It was the best performance in the whole movie, in my opinion, actually. And I also thought Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff was also quite good, actually. But Hong Chau, that's like one of the first things I gotta rant about, because Hong Chau as Nellie, the maid of Kathy, like, yeah, that's like huge miscast. I mean, typical in the modern day, but what do you expect? It's modern day we're talking about. But yes, like Hong Chau as Nellie is really cringy and very much kind of takes you out of the experience, because I just been saying that the production design and all of that is so incredible, but castings like that is a perfect example of how to take a viewer out of a otherwise very immersive experience. And also combined with some of the other weird castings of some random bystanders in the very opening scene of execution. But this is modern Hollywood, so what did we expect? Of course, the most important thing and the key to a great movie and success, though, we all know, is an engaging story and, most importantly, well-written characters. And I thought that at least from the first two-thirds of the movie, this movie simply excelled in that. Like, the story was very engaging. I mean, there were plenty of changes to the book, but as I said at the beginning of the video, I didn't mind all that much because, again, the book has never been among my favorites. I've never been passionate about the story. I did like it, don't get the wrong idea. When I read the book, I did like it and found it engaging, but what mattered to me most is that the movie did very much keep the spirit and deep themes of the book, which really was the most important thing anyway. So, yes. Throughout the first two acts of the movie, I thought the movie simply excelled at the story, and the characters had really lots of depth, and you very much cared about them, and it also really made you think and about things like class division in the 18th century England and all. And I thought that the movie simply wonderfully sold the spirit and the deep themes of the book amazingly well, even if, as I again said, there were plenty of story changes. And the only thing that was pausing me from calling the movie straight up great movie is, again, some of the really cringy castings. Actually, that was the only thing that was stopping me from calling the movie straight up great, actually. But again, the story throughout the first two acts of the movie was really engaging and interesting, really deep and compelling, and the characters had real depth and were so multidimensional, and combined with really excellent performances from the two leads, and you had a recipe for a great period piece, even if some of the other casting choices were pretty questionable, as I've been saying. And another thing that the movie also very much changes from the book, which I had not much problems with, but I totally see some people might actually have huge problems with that, is there were admittedly plenty of sex scenes and lots of nudity in this movie, because we all know that ever since Game of Thrones, it became pretty fashionable and common now to include as much sex in stories like that as possible, even though there was also no sex mentioned in the original book whatsoever. I mean, it was written in the 19th century, it's not like you could expect there be sex described in the book. After all, again, it was really considered acceptable to portray those type of things or written on a page. So yeah, in the original book there is not much sex. I mean, Kathy is pregnant obviously, but that's as far as you could to basically show that the characters had sex. But in this adaptation there is just so much of it, and the director said that this is basically her interpretation of how she read when she was a 14-year-old girl, but I strongly doubt that a 14-year-old girl thinks about sex all that much. It's just that it became really fashionable to portray sex and nudity on screen these days, so what do you expect? But yeah, so if you find those type of things something you can't handle, then I suggest you stay away, because trust me, there is lots of sex scenes in this movie. But now we're getting to my major problem with this movie, besides some of the, again, questionable casting choices, but also I really didn't like the ending of this movie, because the movie actually only adapts the first half of the book. The second half is actually because Kathy actually dies midway through the book. She dies at the end here in this movie, but for the book she dies midway, and then her daughter is born, and then Heathcliff raises her daughter, but is very abusive father, because it's actually not his daughter. I mean, it's the daughter of her husband, actually, just like it was here in this movie. But in this version, spoiler alert, the baby just dies with Kathy, and Kathy dies while still pregnant, and the baby seemingly dies with her. Yep, that's how this version ends, and I really, really didn't like that, especially that I actually really liked the second half of the book. I remember I possibly liked the second half even more than the first half, and I admit I was kind of hoping that maybe they would actually end at the first half of the book, and then maybe they would direct the second half of the book, because again, I remember I actually liked the second half more when I was reading the book, but nope. It's clear that this is basically a different continuity, in a sense that it ends where the first half of the book ended, but because Kathy doesn't give birth to the baby, like the baby dies with her, then obviously the second half of the book cannot happen. And like this, I just really wasn't happy with that. I also seen some people who haven't read the book but complain about the ending, that Heathcliff becomes really unlikable by the end of the movie. But oh well, that shows really haven't read the book, because it's actually pretty consistent with the book actually, because yeah, by the end of the second half of the book he also becomes really, really unlikable, and then throughout the second half that's when he's like real asshole actually, because as I just said, the baby actually survives in the book, and then he raises Kathy's daughter, but not his daughter, like his stepdaughter basically, you could say. I mean, not really, because they weren't married, but he raises Kathy's daughter, but he's very, and I mean very abusive. So if you didn't like that he became really unlikable character by the end of the movie, then you probably would very much hate him in the second half of the book, because it's still nothing compared to what an asshole he becomes in the second half of the book. But yeah, him becoming pretty unlikable by the end of the movie, that's actually one of the few things that the story got very right, actually. Like, while there are plenty of changes to the book, that's one of those things that's very book accurate, actually. But overall, it's been many years since I've been that much conflicted about how I actually feel about the movie. Because on one hand, you have really spectacular production design with really incredible costumes, and all set pieces feeling very authentically recreated from the time period, as well as really beautiful landscapes and really great cinematography, combined with really wonderful performances of the two leads, and even most of the story being really good and engaging, with characters given really a lot of depth. But then on the other hand, you have a change at the end of the movie that I really didn't like. I guess some people might not mind it, but I really didn't like it. And also some of the really questionable or outright cringy casting choices that kind of take you out of the experience a couple of times. So overall, that's my feeling of the Wuthering Heights. Did you see Wuthering Heights? What did you think of it? And thank you all of you for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you later, bye!